Thank you to everyone who is joining us live on Facebook and YouTube. We will be getting started in about 30 seconds. Thank you again to everyone who is joining us live for tonight's The Environmental Justice Exchange Community Organizers Fight Southwest Side Pollution. Here is Brett Chase.
Welcome to the Environmental Justice Exchange. I'm Brett Chase with the Chicago Sun-Times. I'd like to start by giving a big shout out and thank you to the Chicago Community Trust for its generous support, which allows us to cover environmental justice issues. Tonight, we're going to talk about living around the Southwest Side industrial corridors, the growth of warehouses, truck traffic, pollution in city planning. So joining me tonight is José Acosta-Córdova, who's a planning expert. He works in a lot of activism with the the Little Village Environmental Justice Organization, or LVO. And then Executive Director Kim Wasserman, who's longtime activist, current Executive Director of the LVO. Thanks to both of you for joining me tonight. This is a beginning of a conversation about the industrial corridors, and specifically, we're going to focus on the concentration of these corridors on the southwest side of Chicago. So let's kick this off. I had an opportunity to talk to Jose a few weeks ago in front of more than 1 million square foot Target warehouse on the southwest side, which has been just a lightning rod controversy for several years now. And let's roll this clip, and then we'll come back and talk about it.
So my name is José Acosta-Córdova, and I am the Environmental Planning and Research Organizer at the Little Village Environmental Justice Organization. I lead all of our transportation policy, transportation advocacy work, mostly focused around freight, around logistics, warehousing, all things medium and heavy duty truck related.
Standing in front of the Target warehouse, tell us just a little bit about the history there.
So this was a warehouse that was now on the site of the former Crawford coal plant, which was a coal plant that we fought for 12 years as an organization to shut down. We were finally successful in 2012. And in the 2-year span after that, there was discussions with the city around, there was a task force that was created, and there were plans to redevelop the site into something that would benefit the community, that would bring high quality employment, and that wouldn't pollute the community ultimately. And then essentially overnight, in a backroom deal, because we were never informed about it, the site was sold off to Hilco Redevelopment Corporation, and they had plans to build a 1.3 million square foot warehouse on site. And of course, this was without any kind of consultation with the community. So when we heard about this, we were definitely upset. I spoke to a lot of community members who were upset because all this work had been done to plan for something on this site. And then, of course, the city tells us this is where the market is at. TDLs, transportation, distribution, logistics is growing. We want to embrace these kinds of developments. They're going to bring jobs to the community. So since then, we had done a lot of work to try to stop the development from happening. Of course, we weren't successful. The developers, they had the support of the alderman, they had the support of the former mayor. And of course, we found out that they had given a significant amount of money to the former mayor's campaign, as well to a former alderman. The project was ultimately pushed through. We tried our best to stop it, but with the city council supporting the local alderman, and then the plan commission supporting what the mayor wanted as well, the project and the plan was forced through. So now here we are, 1.3 million square foot warehouse. It is the largest warehouse within city limits.
At Target, which is who's leasing this operation, they won't confirm how many trucks go in and out every day. If you had to give a conservative estimate, what would you say? How many trucks are going in there daily?
Yeah, we don't have an official number like you said, but based on what we've seen from similar warehouses in other parts of the country, you have anywhere from 500 to 1,500 trucks a day. We just don't have those kinds of numbers, so we're not sure. With a facility of this size, you have to have at least 500 trucks coming in and out every day.
And of course, we're in the southwest side of Chicago. There's 7 industrial corridors here, thousands. And how many would you conservatively are going through those 7 corridors in this one area of town?
It's at least thousands, right? I mean, it could be even tens of thousands. We also have several intermodal facilities in the southwest part of the city that we know attract tens of thousands of trucks every day. We have Crawford Intermodal, which is the largest intermodal facility in the city. It has close to 900,000 lifts every year, which is, you could actually double that number in terms of estimating how many containers are coming through that facility every year. So that's roughly 1.8 million containers that are coming through that facility alone every year. So a lot of those containers are coming to the local warehouses. They're coming to places like this Target, where they're broken down and then sent out to the retailers, where the consumer, purchases those goods.
Kim, you fought hard to close that coal plant, and you were successful. And then you've described this as just trading one, environmental problem for another. Target's not they don't account for all the trucks, but I mean, it's just heard in that clip. I mean, there are thousands, coming through. What is it like to live in a community where there are just thousands of trucks in and out every day?
Thanks, Brett. Unfortunately, I think for a lot of our community, it becomes the norm, right? From our elementary schools, our parks, our houses are next door to these facilities and have trucks coming through all the time. And so unfortunately, it becomes normalized for our community, but the realities of it are very real in our quality of life when it comes to our health, our environment, our infrastructure in our community, and unfortunately, mortality, because we're losing folks, little ones all the way through seniors, through accidents in our community and across the city. And so I wish I could say it's just our neighborhood that's dealing with this, but it's not. It is more and more communities that are dealing with trucking issues across the city and across the state, quite honest.
And you were involved in other, truck issues in the past. I remember the mayonnaise factory. That was a big issue, which was right up against a school. What was the concern there?
The concern becomes that the city is, as Jose stated in the video, is promoting more and more trucking and logistics in our communities, but they are not planning adequately for what that means for our neighborhoods. And so you literally have expansions of companies like Unilever right next to Zapata Elementary School. I mean, you're talking about trucks sitting 10 feet from where the youngest of these children reside without thought to indoor air quality, right? And so again, they are living and breathing this 9 months out of the year, 8 hours a day that they're in school. They're living across the street from these trucks. It's down the highway from these trucks. It's next to their high school. And if they work in the neighborhood, it's going to be next to their employment, or that's going to be where they work. And so you're talking about a life cycle, a lifetime of exposure to diesel. And at some point you have to ask yourself, when is enough enough? When as a community can we stop being sacrificed for these types of developments in our community?
It tells who lives around these industrial corridors.
For the most part, you're looking at communities of color, low income communities of color, Black and brown neighborhoods. And it's not by chance that these are the neighborhoods in which these industries are located. Jose, I don't know if you want to add.
Yeah, walk us through a little bit of the history too, including the redlining.
Yeah, I think it's really important to look at the history of these corridors, right? These are areas that have been industrial for a long, long time. Some of them as early as the 1850s, right? And we're talking about the origins of the city really being embedded within industrial production. So, and then these areas over the course of the 20th century, really starting with the Great Migration, and then especially post-World War II, transitioned from being working class white or working class ethnic white to being predominantly Black and brown neighborhoods. And so then the use of redlining to disinvest in these areas was a crucial element to this. The use of zoning and keeping these industrial corridors zoned as manufacturing in the name of retaining jobs, right? Retaining industrial employment, which is of course what this city was really built on. So and then when these areas became Black and brown post World War II, especially, you had the further concentration of these facilities, particularly after the deindustrialization of our economy, and the growth of the transportation, distribution, and logistics sector, which really expanded post 1975, 1980. And then you had the further concentration of these facilities in these neighborhoods.
It's interesting. There's more than 24 industrial corridors, and they're not all the same. I mean, the north side ones are. I was just having lunch in one the other day, and it was there's not a lot of manufacturing going on in the north side corridor that I was in Ravenswood. It was nice restaurants and breweries and furniture stores, and But if you look at this concentration of the southwest side, for instance, and I always have to read these, but it's the 7 that the city is like studying right now is Roosevelt, Cicero, Western Ogden, Pilsen, Little Village, Stevenson, Brighton Park, Stockyards. Certainly between all those, there are just a lot of trucks. We're hearing things from the city. All of a sudden, the nature of transportation, distribution, and logistics industry is changing. City's policies must evolve to align with these changes. We're hearing from community stakeholders about priorities that may need to be addressed differently than they have been in the past. I think we have another clip, if we could go to that now. Jose talking about some of this.
Both the Department of Transportation, I think, along with Planning and Development, are doing this truck study. All these trucks going into the 7 southwest side industrial corridors. And there was even some language about realizing the burdens on these communities. So I'm finally hearing, like, you would hear that sometimes maybe from the city's sustainability officer, maybe from the Chicago Department of Public Health, but now you're finally hearing at least planning and transportation saying, you know what, maybe this is too much. What would you hope would come out of that?
Yeah, no, it's been good to finally hear some of that language shift, and that really started with the Little Village Industrial Corridor modernization process that we engaged in back in 2018, and really during that process, which was led by the Department of Planning and Development, right? They wanted to make our industrial corridor more friendly to transportation and to warehousing and logistics, and so we had to fight to show them that there was an issue, and that's why the truck counting that we did was so important, because we engaged in truck counting with young people from Little Village High School, as well as some of our youth interns during the summertime, our summer program, and we posted up at the busiest intersections, and we've done that data count ourselves because the city didn't have that data available to us. The only data that we have for truck counts is through IDOT, right, Illinois Department of Transportation, and they only focus on highways, some of the major roadways, but mostly on highways. So some of these like smaller neighborhood level statistics we didn't have, so we had to create that ourselves. And so I think the work that we did to show DPD that there was an issue, that we had Pulaski and 31st Street, for example, which was seeing more than 4 trucks coming through every minute at some times of the day. It was really important to change that conversation to get DPD and CDOT to say, okay, there is an issue, but we need to address it. So we're hoping that with this truck study now, we can start talking about reform. I think electrification is probably the most immediate and short-term solution that we can get out of that because it deals with the air pollution issue at least. It doesn't deal with congestion and some of the other infrastructure issues, but at the very least, if our communities aren't being poisoned every day, that's a good start.
Kim, under the manual administration, there was a Little Village Industrial Corridor Modernization, that's a mouthful, report. It was a 76-page report, and one of the goals was to improve the economic, environmental, and social conditions around the Little Village corridor. Did that happen?
Fortunately, no.
Oh, you're on mute.
What that process really exposed to us was a lack of information understanding that the city actually has on the current industrial corridor. I mean, we had high school students and summer interns who basically out-researched the city of Chicago when it came to the number of businesses, the number of trucks, the air quality issues. Our communities had to become planners, scientists. We had to become all of these things because we weren't being believed about what was happening on the ground. And so the first round. for the industrial corridor modernization process was simply a tit for tat on what the realities of living in Little Village are actually like. And we were able to successfully win these studies to hopefully show what we are experiencing is not in our heads, that it's really not just here in Little Village, but it's in those 7 areas that you talked about and beyond the counties, the suburbs of Chicago, and the whole state of Illinois. And so this is a problem that's not just a problem for Little Village, it is a problem for the entire state, to not just be welcoming intermodal and diesel facilities with open arms, but to really be asking themselves, what are the alternatives? What else can we be doing?
This was an interesting process too, because it followed the review of another industrial corridor that was the North Branch in Lincoln Park, and that was a much different experience. I mean, there was a lot of city attention. I think we've talked about this. A lot of people speculated that whole modernization process of looking at the industrial corridors was really just to gentrify the Lincoln Park one, which of course has led to a lot of. I mean, that the development didn't materialize as it was anticipated to, and then it sent General Iron down to the southeast side, which created a whole nother environmental justice fight. Am I accurate in that that was the suspicion that let's get Lincoln Park gentrified and let's keep Little Village the same?
Absolutely. I mean, I think what our communities have been studied time and time again. There is report after report about what our neighborhood's great at, what our neighborhood doesn't have, right? All the problems we have. And instead of actually solving those and listening to what communities on the ground are saying, what we're doing instead is investing in continuing to pollute our neighborhoods, right? What happened in Lincoln Park was not by accident. It was a fundamental move to shift those industries down to our communities and gentrify that part of the community, right? We can accept that waste. We can be the sacrifice zones for the good and the well-being of the city to maintain these corporate actors. And as you can see today, we are to the point where we can no longer afford to do that, right? Our environment, our communities can no longer withstand being sacrificed in this manner. It is coming at too great of a cost to our communities.
Yeah, and another quote from the city. This is actually from those slides that was part of a community engagement on that Southwest Industrial Corridor study that's being done on traffic. It says, TDL, which stands for Transportation, Distribution, Logistics, and related industrial activity, is a critical part of the economy. But like many economic activities, it can place particular burdens on communities that need to be mitigated and addressed. So again, we're hearing the right things. How are you guys going to hold these folks accountable? How are you going to hold the city's planning and transportation folks accountable?
I think that's the key question here, right? Is what does accountability look like? And even if you compare actually the Southwest Industrial Corridor process to the Little Village one, actually we had a lot more contact with the city during that process, which is interesting, because you would have thought that after the way that process played out, and the fact that they ultimately were not able to get their plan passed because there was so much public comment about just how poorly done the project was, the lack of engagement, all kinds of things, right? And in this process, we actually haven't heard anything from the city, from consultants. We've heard from another consultant, the Center for Neighborhood Technology, who we work with to give them some of our priorities as environmental justice communities for the Southwest side. But in terms of the main consultants, the DPD, CDOT, we haven't heard much in terms of what next steps are, what the timeline is like, and there's been minimal community engagement actually. So I think we're actually a little bit unsure about what this process is going to look like, and what the ultimate outcome will be.
And I'll just add that not only have we gotten no information, no transparency, but the fact of the matter is that we can't this is the problem. These are the same folks who created the system. These are the same folks who are benefiting off of the system. They cannot be trusted to fix the system without our community. And that's the biggest problem we have, is the city, this mayor refuses to understand, except for cumulative impact right now, which is, we're working on it. But things like this, they refuse to listen to us and respect the fact that we are experts in our own community, right? There are things right now that could be done if the mayor and its administration and its departments chose to enforce as part of their permit, their review. Med Asphalt should not be able to go in for a contract if they're fighting the city on fees for environmental issues, right? There's some basics. Alderman Smith should not be able to go get a job at CineSpace as vice president of community engagement and buy lots from the city as a former alderman, right? There are basic things. Alderman Cardenas should not be able to host concerts at Douglas Park, but ask McKinley Park residents if they want a concert in their neck of the woods. There needs to be a better process, permitting process, application process, transparency process when it comes to the city making decisions about land use in our community. And this is not, it's not just environmental. It's across the board when it comes to our schools, when it comes to the police department, when it comes to the environment. Across the board, fundamentally, people have demanded for transparency and a shift in how things in the city are happening. And that it doesn't happen. What continues to happen is our community sold out to industry, to police, right, to these corporations to get their corporate handouts. And so it's the same fight across the board. And accountability is voting. Accountability is holding Lightfoot accountable. Accountability is holding our aldermen accountable. And if they're not doing it, then we need to bring in young people, the people who can hold our city and our mayor accountable.
And of course, we're talking about issues that have real impact on, people's lives. I mean, we talk about the families, we talk about the kids, the health impacts. Kim, talk a little bit about that. Talk about asthma rates and, some of the other health issues that, are, perhaps a direct, result of the pollution, the air pollution in your community. Kim, if you want to take that one.
Sorry, could you say that last part, Brett? Again, I apologize. My internet went out.
Oh, I'm sorry. Talk about the impact on the kids and their health, and tell us a little bit about the health of children in your area.
Look, the fact of the matter is as a neighborhood from the coal power plant fight, where we knew that we were getting impacted by the coal pollution, trucking is no different. You can ask the average person on the street whether trucking is an issue in the neighborhood, and they will tell you fundamentally yes. Our community's inability to breathe is very clear in our children, in our adults, and in our elderly. And it befuddles me that our community leaders continue to act like jobs will make asthma better, that jobs will make the insurance issues better, right? Our communities are suffering at the hands of not just health impacts, but environmental impacts. We just had a horrific storm just come through our neighborhood. Yes, we had tornado sirens going off across the city. And in fact, there was 6 natural disasters across the Americas alone yesterday, right? Our environment is no longer able to sustain what we are currently doing to it. And our people know this. Our people are contributing the least to it, but are feeling the impacts first and foremost. And what this fundamentally comes down to is Black and brown and poor white communities across the United States fighting back against warehouses and port authorities, and this notion that because we're in a pandemic, everything has to be shipped, and the economy and the movement of goods is the most important on the backs of our communities. There is no reason why Target cannot electrify in a community like ours. There is no reason why the city cannot demand that of that company. They simply choose not to. And I think that fundamentally, at the end of the day, is what we're talking about. Is basic human does not mean that we deserve to be put in this situation. And our folks are sick of it. They are fundamentally sick of it.
Let's go to our last clip. We start to talk about some of these pollution issues, and then we'll return.
You should explain too that this is the danger of that too. It's the particle pollution. It can get deep into the lungs. We just did a story on this, but I mean that's a big source of that type of air pollution, right?
Yeah, absolutely, and there were actually times when we would have the young people wear masks just to protect them a little bit from that exposure, and yeah, that's a really important aspect of it, because these are young people who are still developing their lungs, and from, like I said, from the time they're kindergarten to 12th grade, they're being exposed to diesel particulate matter every day, and that of course gets lodged in their lungs, and who knows what kind of problems they might have down the road. So again, this is the reality that our communities are facing on the southwest side and southeast side of the city, and other parts of the Chicago metro area as well, where warehouses are being located directly adjacent to schools. Perfect example is in Gage Park, where you had an Amazon facility be approved at 51st and St. Louis, and it's literally right next to 3 schools. And there was no consideration by the local alderperson, by the Department of Planning, the city of Chicago. Like, they just, Amazon's bringing in jobs was their rationale. And of course, we have our communities and our young people's health being sacrificed in the name of economic development. So that's what we're trying to reform in this work that we're doing.
look, Kim, looking at that visual of how close the schools are to that warehouse, it reminds me of the how the Little Village High School was built right across from some pretty polluting factories there. I remember the anecdote about the cross country team that couldn't run outside. Tell me about particle pollution. You know a lot about this, right? I mean, it's bad, and it's one of the the most common. Probably largely because we have all these different sources, including diesel emissions.
I think it's heartbreaking seeing that imagery. It is heartbreaking because if it's not the physical environment that's killing our children, it's police violence or violence in general that's killing our children. And at some point, you got to ask yourself, when do our kids get a chance? When do they get a chance to be able to grow up? You know what I mean? In a healthy environment and community at large. And it's heartbreaking. I'm a mom of 3 with asthma. And that is why I got into this work. And it breaks my heart that parents continue to have to deal with this issue, and particularly in a pandemic that's respiratory. So you get a double whammy and then a triple whammy when you walk outside your door and hope that you don't get hit by a truck in your neighborhood or an Amazon truck in your neighborhood, right? And so it multiplies. And I think what's scary enough as it is the Respiratory Health Association just put out a report that showed that the pollution levels in the state are 21% higher when it comes to diesel emissions than the national average. In Illinois, 21% higher, right? And what that means is that in Illinois, technically next year, you're gonna be looking at over 5,000 asthma attacks a year happening in the state because of this issue. And so particulate matter is no joke. It comes from the exhaust. It gets into your lungs and it gets into the deepest parts of your lungs. And if you are in a community already overburdened, what that means is you will not be able to breathe. What that means is you will not be able to run around your neighborhood. You will not be able to bike around your neighborhood for multiple reasons, right? You will have to think about your employment. You will have to think about your health benefits. You'll have to think about access to healthcare, the type of job that you can have. You have to consider whether or not you can break the law or be arrested by 5-0 because you won't be able to breathe if you get handcuffed, right? Exponentially, respiratory health issues are an additional death threat to our communities walking around in our neighborhoods already alone. And again, when do we get a chance to be just ourselves? When do we get a chance to just thrive in our environment? We're not afforded that luxury in our communities right now.
Governor Pritzker's been urged to sign this this memorandum with a bunch of other states. I want to say it exceeds 15 other states that governors have all committed to really accelerating the transition to electric vehicles. And the governor is in a campaign year, and he's been reticent because I think there's some business pushback. But maybe I'll throw this one out to you, Jose. I mean, what could city, state, federal planners do to help us move quicker into to get to electrification of vehicles?
Yeah, this MOU is a critical first step, right? And in fact, I think the number now is over 17 states, including the District of Columbia. And so there's really no reason why Illinois hasn't, shouldn't sign that or hasn't signed it yet, other than the fact that there has been some pressure from business. And I think, like you said, he's in an election year. So our governor's in an election year. So I think, that definitely plays in a factor. But the MOU is really just a critical first step towards signing the Advanced Clean Truck Rule, and then the NOx Omnibus Rule, and then the Indirect Source Rule. And then, of course, the Advanced Clean Fleet Rule is one that they're also working on at the moment. And all these came out of California through the California Air Resources Board, and the air quality management districts within that state as well. So there's a lot of that we're learning from California in terms of what's worked and what hasn't yet. But I think it really presents a model for Illinois to move forward on that. And really what it does is, like you said, it facilitates the adoption of electric trucks, the production of electric trucks. It puts more standards on existing diesel trucks, what the NOx Omnibus Rule does. But the Advanced Clean Truck Rule is that critical first step. And actually, we're in the midst of creating a coalition right now called the I'm gonna say this slowly, the Neighbors for an Equitable Transition to Zero Emissions, otherwise known as Net Z. This is a coalition that we are collaborating with Respiratory Health Association and Warehouse Workers for Justice to put this coalition together. And of course, we already spoke with many organizations who are going to be a part of this. And if you're an organization out there who feels like you deal with a lot of diesel and truck issues in your community, please reach out to us and let us know if you're interested in joining, because there's so many communities out there, not just in the southwest side of the city, but throughout the entire Chicago region that are dealing with truck intensive facilities that are polluting communities, where there's not a whole lot of environmental justice work being done. So this is really a critical moment in history for us to move forward on this ACT and get the state of Illinois on track to electrify the medium and heavy duty vehicles in the state.
This is a good transition into some of our questions from folks. Some people submitted questions ahead of time, and several were sort of all along the same line as to what can be done, what can people do, the different approaches. One question specifically seemed to come from somebody who's like maybe a clean energy or carbon reduction advocates, is how can other advocates help? And you just mentioned some other groups. It struck me that like how many different advocacy organizations do come together for some of these environmental issues and in environmental justice in particular. Either one of you want to take that? Or? Go ahead.
Yeah, I think this is an issue that affects everybody. And I always hear Kim talk about how air pollution is not stagnant, right? And it doesn't just stay in Little Village and doesn't stay in the southwest side. It's across the entire region, right? We just know we have higher concentrations of those facilities in our communities, right? So I think there's an issue that people want to understand. But I think once people understand that these issues also impact their own communities, they also want to support, get involved. And the people just genuinely care sometimes, right? They want to support the work that we're doing. But this is also part of a larger issue of climate change, right? These diesel trucks are contributing significantly to greenhouse gas emissions. And this is something that's ultimately impacting our entire planet, right? So what happens in Chicago is going to impact what happens in other parts of the world, and vice versa. So I think, for those of us that see we're all part of a similar fight or a unified fight to achieve climate justice, to achieve economic and environmental justice, I think we all genuinely come together on some of these issues to fight for reform, to fight for justice.
And I'll add that I think there's, the MOU opens the door to have conversations across multiple levels. This is not just an issue of dirty diesel trucks in our communities across the board in the state. It's a question of the infrastructure. Do our bridges and our roads, can they handle this? The question of jobs, right? If our communities are being impacted by the air quality issues, best believe the truck drivers are front and center, and warehouse workers are front and center at that, for the truck drivers and for the warehouse workers as well. There's the question of electrification and who's going to make those engines? Where are those engines going to be made? Where are the charging stations going to be put, right? If our communities are the first and foremost impacted, then electrification should be first and foremost for our communities, for those places that have worked on diesel historically to be able to transition to electric. There are tons of conversations and tons of places that folks can get connected into the fight for this conversation at a larger point. And so we invite all communities to be part of the conversation, because this is impacting us across the board fundamentally as our politicians continue to make these decisions.
Yeah, it's interesting when Governor Pritzker was being urged by legislators, both chambers, to pass these resolutions saying, Governor, please, please sign this. One of the, or a couple of the big advocates were the CEOs of the two electric vehicle manufacturers that are, here in Illinois. So there is, there is some potential for economic, development, growth there as well. The We Will Chicago is a big comprehensive planning effort. I don't. It seems to be more about community engagement. Have you talked to other community members about how they can participate in that? Have you been involved in it? the We Will Chicago planning effort?
I can start off, and Jose, please feel free to chime in. As an organization, we have not, quite honestly, both because of capacity, but as I've said, we've been studied time and time again as a community. There are tons of different reports on what people have wanted and want for our communities. And so I think for a lot of our communities, there comes a point when you get tired of being asked the same questions. You get tired of submitting public comment and it being ignored. You get tired of being asked like how to solve the violence in our neighborhoods. Our communities have answered those questions time and time again, and what the city's doing ain't it, right? And so there comes a point where as community, you just ask yourself, why am I continuing to give information if it's going to be ignored? And so I think for our communities, any plan that does not speak to accountability, any plan that does not speak to transparency, and any plan that only uses our communities as a checkbox is not a plan that we're interested in, to be honest.
Yeah, no, the only thing I'll add is that I think some of the concern too that we've heard from folks is around like whether or not this will actually change anything too, right? And like, I mean, like you said, we've been part of these a number of times, but ultimately the city is continuing to support these kinds of warehouse developments and TDL developments, like we said earlier, in the name of jobs, and they actually end up pitting communities against each other, right? During the city council fights or the city council meetings when we were trying to fight against the Hillco development, you had other aldermen who spoke up and said, well, that they don't want it over there, we'll take it, right? And the fact is, right, there's a lot of our communities are dealing with unemployment or underemployment issues, and they use these TDL developments as justification for saying, hey, look, we're actually bringing these jobs to your community. Never mind the fact that these jobs don't pay well, right? That they're, often exploit Black and brown workers or immigrant workers, that these jobs are not wealth creating jobs, and they're not going to lift anybody out of poverty, right? It just matters that you're bringing jobs, right? So when you think about plans like the We Will plan or the climate action plan, it's like, why are they still continuing to support these kinds of projects on one end, but then doing something like, or saying that they're trying to solve issues in the community on the other end when the two don't align. And in fact, when you talk about the climate action plan, why, how are more warehouses gonna improve our climate in Chicago or nationally or globally? It doesn't make any sense. So I think that what we've seen from the city is really contradictory. They say they want to do these things, but then they do the opposite, or they say that they want to help, but they end up hurting our community. So again, that's, when it comes to plans like that, there's just a lot of skepticism from our organization and from many community members as well.
And another question that came in, related to what can be done, is just asking about feasibility. Like what's feasible? Like, and I think that it's kind of broad. Like what's feasible now? What can we do right away? What can we do down the road? I mean, when we talked about electrification, that's going to take a lot, because we need the infrastructure to be able to make sure that these vehicles can run. But let's just tackle that for a minute. What's something we can do right away? It doesn't cost that much money. What are things that can be done with help from the other governments or aspirational?
I think feasibility-wise, there's a couple things. I think the reality is, as I mentioned, companies like Target and Unilever, whether or not they own their fleet, have the capital to electrify their vehicles. Whether or not it's expensive, that's another thing. But the question is, they have the capacity to do so. And companies moving into Chicago that have the capital to not only electrify, but pay good wages shouldn't be able to take tax breaks, shouldn't be able to get away with paying or abusing of their staff. I think other things that can happen, as we mentioned, the procurement processes for the city can be improved. They can not take applications from folks who are currently suing them because of violations. They can choose to look at labor records for these industries and figure out if they have labor violations, do they want to do business in Chicago? They can definitely look at whether or not these companies have had other incidences. Do they have a current permit? If they don't have a current permit, should they be allowed to do business in Chicago? So there are basic things that the city could be doing now in which they could be embracing public health. They could be embracing justice and economic justice in our communities. But they're, to Jose's point, they're choosing not to. They're choosing to go for the construction jobs are unionized, so that's good enough. That's not good enough for our communities anymore. And so there are fundamental things that can happen right now if the city would choose to step up to the plate and be worried about protecting our community instead of being worried about being sued by these industries.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'll add too is that I think the city needs to exercise its power a little bit more. We often hear from folks that there's feelings of nervousness, I guess, maybe, or something along the lines of that, where they don't want to put too many regulations or requirements on some of these industries. And when you think about the role of Chicago in the movement of goods, right, we're not that status is not going to change anytime soon. As much as we would like to see that reduction happen and more localized production happen, and those are still possibilities, of course. But the fact that we have so much infrastructure for rail means that our status as the freight hub of North America is not going to change anytime soon, right? We have 6 out of 7 Class 1 railroads converge in the Chicago metropolitan area, the only part of the continent where that happens, right? So this is not going to change. So this idea that if we put too many regulations on them that they're going to leave is false. It's not going to happen, right? So doing things like, okay, well, if you are going to exist and operate in our city, then we need to see more commitment to protecting those communities that you operate in, right? So that means forcing trucks to electrify, forcing companies to provide that infrastructure. We're talking about the biggest rail companies in the United States, right? Some that are owned by some of the wealthiest people in the world. So there might be some pushback, but the city needs to exercise its power. And the other thing too is building on things that are happening already, like the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, right? CEJA, where there's going to be tens of millions of dollars in the next couple of years, and then ultimately hundreds of millions of dollars put towards the construction or the building of charging infrastructure in our communities, right? So it's coming, the money's coming in terms of building that infrastructure. Now it's up to some of these companies to respond and say, okay, well, we're going to take advantage of that infrastructure that's there and some of the other incentives that are going to be available to us to electrify our fleets and then ultimately do so and actually be good neighbors and not just pollute our communities.
It's sort of an interesting question about engaging the communities, engaging the public, and it was like we considered art as a means to visualize these issues. And I think we've had this discussion before. So why don't you take that, Kim?
I appreciate that question, and folks can definitely check out our social media channels and our website in the sense of art is a fundamental part of the organizing and education work that we do. As a community, art is one of the cultural pillars of not just how we express ourselves, but how our social justice movements in general are moved forward and communicated across the community. Last year we released a coloring book that will be re-releasing this year around the Hillco implosion and how folks felt, how it impacted them, and the lifelong impacts that's going to have on our individuals, on our community at large. And that's something we're hoping to put up in a mural in our community to remember what has happened in our neighborhood. And so art is a fundamental part of the work that we do, and will continue to be a fundamental part of the work that we do, just because it's just so intrinsically tied to culturally to the work that we do, but also just from a justice perspective.
Any other pitches out there? Pitches as to other things that you're going to be working on this summer? Any events? You don't always telegraph your actions ahead of time, but well in advance. But what are some of the things that you're going to be doing to engage the community this summer?
There's a couple of things. Well, number one is we continue to be remote. COVID unfortunately continues to impact our city and our state, and because precautions are continually mandated, it is impacting our communities incredibly heavily. We will be hosting volunteer days at our community farm. And so definitely look out for that. There will be opportunities to come out and support events like Healing in the Park, which is happening pretty soon, and just different events that we collectively will be participating in, different conversations that we'll be hosting outside in our communities around riverfront development that's happening, cleanup of the collateral channel, and just other demands, community demands that folks have and continue to have. So definitely check out our social media channels and look for opportunities are always present online for the organization.
I want to thank you both for for joining me tonight. So I've been talking to José Acosta-Córdova, who's active in El Veo and is also a PhD student, and one of my go-to sources for transportation and planning issues. And then Kim Wasserman, who's longtime executive director of El Veo and just an environmental justice warrior. And if you want to learn more about El Veo, you can go to the website. It's elveo.org. That's LVEJO.org, and to learn more about them. And this is just at the beginning of a conversation. For those of you who may be watching this on replay, please reach out to me with any other questions. I'm happy to circle back to Kim and Jose. If we can, just get your answers. But I'm at bchase at suntimes.com. It's BCHASE at suntimes.com. And we're going to have more of these. And I'm looking forward to the day we can actually have a live event. And, we were talking about that. And, then we were getting a little skittish with the COVID numbers and some other issues. So, but I can't wait to, actually have a lot of people in a, space where we can, feel safe and talk about these issues. So, so I'm Brett Chase, Sun Times, and thanks again, and thanks to the Chicago Community Trust for all its great support.
Thank you, Brett.
Thank you so much.
Thank you to everyone who has joined us. To find these stories and all others, please head to paper.suntimes.com to see a all digital replica of the paper every day, which you can get. Go to email Brett Chase, first of all, if you have any questions, at bchase@suntimes, and to get our digital offer to get unlimited access to both the e-paper and every story on suntimes.com for only $2.49 a month. Head to suntimes.com/subscribe. I'm Brian Ernst, and thank you everyone for tuning in.